first, every meeting must be starting by أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم, and asking madad of Mawlana Shaykh Adnan Kabbani, Sultan of Awliya, and Shaykh Adnan, and also supportation and madad to support us from the divinely oceans of mercies, Muhammad and Rasulullah, seed of Prophet Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and Allah Almighty to open on us to understand the divine kind of knowledge, this divine teaching, which related to the city of realities and secrets. Where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, I am the city of realities and secrets, and Siddiq is the door of this city. And for this the way, Siddiqi way, which known after then as the Naqshbandi way, is something it's something very difficult for everyone to understand or to accept by his mind, or to enter to his mind, because it is something which is related to the usually can be understood only by the heart, by iman, cannot be understood by mind but by heart. And for this the four mazhab, Imam of four mazhab, Sayyidina Imam Abu Hanifa, and Sayyidina Imam Malik, and Sayyidina Imam Shafi'i, Sayyidina Imam Muhammad, all of them, they used to have a way. Everyone has a way, and everyone has a shaykh, and every one of them used to put the mazhab according to the man, but then he will take the secrets of the of their school, of their how they reform their mazhab from their shaykh. Even for example, Sayyidina Imam Shafi'i, his shaykh, was totally not a scholar one. He was called Shaykh Adnan, big awliya. He used to be a shepherd, but he was a complete ocean, a whole big ocean in divine knowledge. Sayyidina Ahmad ibn Hanbal, his shaykh was Sayyidina Bishr al-Haqi, also a big awliya, illiterate ones, not the ones who they are well educated, like Sayyidina Ahmad ibn Hanbal or Sayyidina Imam Shafi'i. Allah educate them. How Allah Almighty teach Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Rasulullah teaching these awliya. Sayyidina Abu Hanifa and Sayyidina Imam Malik, these two big imams, these two reformers, their shaykh was Sayyidina Ja'far al-Sadiq. And Sayyidina Ja'far al-Sadiq was also a big imam in spiritualities, realities, secrets, and one of our grand shaykh is the golden chain. He is after Sayyidina al-Qasim, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, then Sayyidina Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, then Sayyidina Salman al-Farisi, then Sayyidina Muhammad al-Qasim, then Sayyidina Ja'far al-Sadiq. And Sayyidina Ja'far al-Sadiq is the grandson of Sayyidina Hassan and Hussein. He is the descendant of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. His grandfather is Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and so he inherited the secrets of the city of knowledge, which Rasulullah say, I am the city of knowledge, and Ali radiallahu anhu is the door of this city. أنا مدينة العلم وعلي بابه. I am the city of knowledge, and Ali is the door of it. And also he said, I am the city of realities and secrets, and Siddiq is the door of it. And so till Sayyidina Ja'far al-Sadiq, he was inheriting from both Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and Sayyidina Ali Ridwanullahi alayhim. And after Sayyidina Ja'far as-Sadiq, every grand Shaykh, every Siddiq of his time, and after Sayyidina Ja'far as-Sadiq was Sayyidina Abu Yazid al-Bastami, Sultan al-Arifin, used to be inheriting from both Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu and Sayyidina Abu Bakr. And for this, Sayyidina Imam Abu Hanifa, at the end of his age, before he passed away by 2 years, he met, according to the will of Allah Almighty in the day of promises, he met his Shaykh, Sayyidina Ja'far al-Sadiq. And when he met him, and he reached to the reality, and to these divine secrets and realities, he was shouting, if not these 2 last years of my age, I will be totally finished. I will be as if I will be a one who will be not even recognize anything about Islam or Sharia, and even he is the reformer, and he has a school and a mazhab called Mazhab al-Hanaf. And then in these last 2 years when he met Sayyidina Ja'far al-Sadiq, he changed all his mazhab, he changed all his school, and he built it up according to the teaching of Sayyidina Ja'far al-Sadiq. And for this, the easiest mazhab in between all these 4 mazhab, the Sayyidina Abu Hanifa mazhab. And for this, all the Turkish, non-Arabic tongue, they and all beyond the rivers, they took to be in the school of Sayyidina Abu Hanifa, because the easiest mazhab were the one, because it is based on the knowledge of Sayyidina Ja'far al-Sadiq. And Awliyaullah always making everything to be easy for everyone who wants reality, for everyone who wants to reach to his realities, for everyone who wants to reach to Allah Almighty. They make the way so easy for everyone. And for this, Sayyidina Abu Hanifa make his mazhab, his school, to be so easy for everyone, even in Sharia, so that he will be quickly reaching to the point where Allah Almighty saying in the Holy Quran, anyone who make his best in Sharia to keep it and to struggle in it and to progress in it, I will open for him my ways, which is leading to the divine presence of Allah Almighty and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. And for this, this kind of knowledge is a knowledge which cannot be balanced by mind. Only can be taken as it is by the heart. Because Allah Almighty, Iman, faith, is in the heart, not in the mind. Because the mind will make you in doubt. If you are worshipping, for example, it will tell you are worshipping Allah Almighty. Who created Allah Almighty? Allah is the creator. Who was before him to appear him? The mind will tell you like this. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he started to teach the Sahaba when the mind of you, everyone, bringing him to be in doubt in his Iman, only say these 2 words to your mind. Amantu billahi wa rasuli. We have faith, we have Iman in Allah and Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and finish stop with that. Because mind cannot obtain Iman. Iman, Allah make it only to be in the heart of children of Adam alayhi salam. And for this Allah Almighty saying, neither heavens or earths, I choose them to be house for me, or can carry me. Only the heart of children of Adam alayhi salam, I choose it to be a house for me, because only the heart of children of Adam can carry me. He didn't say the mind, he said the heart of Allah Almighty. ما وسعتني لا سماء ولا أرض ولكن وسعني قلب عبدي. Neither heavens or earths can carry me, only the heart of children of Adam alayhi salam can carry Allah Almighty, and Allah Almighty chose the hearts of children of Adam to be His house, and send in this heart of every one of us His throne, His light, His greatest name, and by this movement of oneness, of wahdaniyya of Allah Almighty, and by this light of the greatest name of Allah Almighty, in every one of us, life is going on in our physical body, and making us to be choosing which way we want to walk in it, either good way, and Allah Almighty will support you to be in this way, or you will choose the bad way of shaitan, and Allah will also give you power and support you to be in the way of shaitan. Because Allah Almighty is Almighty, Allah Almighty. He is so great that He doesn't care. Whatever you want to choose. I don't care. I am Allah Almighty. I am not in need for you, you are in need for me. And for this, everyone choosing the way of shaitan, you will see at the end, all of them, they are suffering. And everyone choosing the way of Allah Almighty, they will be then in happiness and peaceful, and they will be in paradises, in neighborhood to Allah Almighty and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, inshallah, yesterday we reached that Allah Almighty, where we reach, anyone remember? We reached Allah Almighty, one, He said, I have a hidden treasure. We only make a conclusion. I have a hidden treasure, and my will to be known, I create creation, and by me they know me. And the first order from the divine, the godly word of command of Allah Almighty, Allah Almighty ordering the divine, the godly word of light to appear. And Allah Almighty just His will that the godly word of light to appear, and it was taking this godly divine, the godly word of light, the picture and the figure, the shape, as appearing as Muhammad-ur-Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, seed of prophet. And Allah Almighty then making Allah Almighty making this light, the divine, the godly word of light of Allah Almighty, which Allah Almighty making it to appear from the hidden treasure, and from it, from this divine, the godly word of light was reflecting from it, the descending from the hidden treasure of the absolute identity of Allah Almighty, the descending of the essence of Allah Almighty, the descending of the essence, the uniqueness of Allah Almighty, the descending of the uniqueness of Allah Almighty to the oneness of Allah Almighty, wahdaniyya of Allah Almighty. Then the descendants of the wahdaniyya is the attribute divine, the godly word of attributes of Allah Almighty. Then the descendant of the divine, the godly word of attributes, the divine, the godly words of names of Allah Almighty. Then after the names, the divine, the godly word of deeds, which Allah Almighty made to appear and create. And we are all creations here, in these universes, which mean from throne and down to throne, all they are rotating in their orbit, swimming in the ocean of deeds of Allah Almighty. Over the throne, over Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam, start the divinely word of names of Allah Almighty, then over the throne, the attributes, then over the uniqueness of Allah Almighty, over it will be the essence of Allah Almighty, over the essence it will be the absolute identity of Allah Almighty. Then the absolute identity of Allah Almighty goes to be in the hidden treasure, where for this Allah Almighty saying, Allah Almighty, this hidden treasure, Allah Almighty, He is now as He was. He was the hidden treasure, and He is now still as He was. Nothing is Him, only hidden treasure, and all these, whatever you are seeing, these deeds, what is appearing as creations, all they are like shadows. And Mawlana Shaykh Adnan said, like, for example, if they make fireworks, when they make fireworks, and they will throw the fireworks, how much they will give so beautiful lights in the sky, and then all of a sudden disappear. Like this world. These are the deeds. And all the deeds coming from the divinely godly word of Amma. Amma means where no one is able from all these creations, all these shadows, all these deeds to see from where it's coming. There is a veil. No one can see what is behind this veil. The one who can see behind this veil, only the one who is dressed by his reality, and he has one foot behind this veil and one foot in front, as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to say, إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ يُوحَى إِلَيْهِ. Don't think, you say that I am like every one of you, but I am not like you. I am connected. I have a face with you, one foot with you, and I have one foot, one face with Allah Almighty. I can cross this border, but no one else can cross this border. And for this border is totally prevented, no one to cross it, except after the day of Yawm al-Qiyamah, day of judgment. Even now, when the one will die, he will not cross it. He will remain in another world called Barzakh, وَمِنْ وَرَائِهِمْ بَرْزَخٌ, a light, divinely godly world, which also under the throne of Allah Almighty, where there the souls will be swimming in the ocean of reflection of the oneness of Allah Almighty, Wahdaniyah. The soul will swim in it, while the body will be eaten by the earth in this planet, will be buried here, not allowed to go out of this earth. They will be here. Except for the ones whom they are with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which Allah Almighty described them in the ayat, that Allah Almighty witnessing that you are my seed, messenger, Rasul. I am witnessing that you are my Rasul, and the ones whom they are with you. These ones, they are over this one. These are a VIP, a band whom Allah created them to be with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who represent Allah Almighty, who is the Khalif and the representative, the perfect perfect creation, as for creations, and the perfect example of the light of Allah Almighty, the example of the light of Allah Almighty, because Allah Almighty says, Allah Almighty is the light of all earths and heavens, of all these descendants of the descendant of the stages which Allah Almighty descending from hidden inside the hidden treasure to absolute identity, to essence, to uniqueness, to oneness, attributes, names, deeds. Allah Almighty saying, I am the light. Everything in this, it will return at the end to be light, to be energy. And I am the light of all this. And the example of my light is Allah Almighty saying, this divine, the godly word of light which Allah Almighty ordered to be appearing and disappear as Muhammad-ur-Rasul. And Allah Almighty describing it in the Holy Quran by this ayah, Allahu nuru as-samawati wal-ard, mathalu nurihi kamishkatin fiha misbah, المصباح في زجاجة، الزجاجة كأنها كوكب دري يوقد من شجرة مباركة زيتونة لا شرقية ولا غربية يكاد زيتها يضيء ولو لم تمسسه نار نور على نور يهدي الله لنوره من يشاء ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس لعلهم يتفكرون. Allah Almighty saying, I am the light of heavens and earths, of all descendants and of Allah Almighty, and whatever coming from the attributes, from the names, from the deeds, I am the light of all. And the example of my light, Allah Almighty saying, He's not saying my light is like this, because Allah cannot be described, and all His attributes cannot be described, and all His uniqueness and oneness and essence cannot be described. Allah cannot be described. And when Allah Almighty telling Rasulullah in the night journey, describe me, He told him, praise be to you, Allah Almighty. There is no tongue, no one can describe you. Praise be to you, no one can give a description for you. And Allah Almighty saying, I am a something, but not like anything. No description for Allah Almighty. And also for the attributes of Allah Almighty, Mawlana said, no, there is no description. For the light of Allah Almighty, you cannot describe it. And for this Allah Almighty in this ayat, He is describing, saying, the example of my light. He is describing the example of His light. Who is the example of the light of Allah Almighty? Whom is the example of the light of Allah Almighty? Allah Almighty chose the divinely godly word of light which represent, which is the example of the real lights of Allah Almighty to be sealed of Prophet Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Say like this in the Holy Quran, Allah Almighty this ayat, not from my pocket, bringing it, and saying, describing the example of my light as if it is a kamishkatin fiha misbah, as if like a lamp, and in the lamp there is a inside this glass there is a lamp, and the lamp inside it kamishkatin fiha misbah, and misbah fi zujaja, it is covered by glass. Not as we know this glass is not a glass, not like our glass. المصباح في زجاجة، الزجاجة كأنها كوكب دري. This glass is like a planet, a crystal planet, cannot be described or cannot be given any description from anyone except from Allah Almighty. Even this, the example of the light of Allah Almighty cannot describe this planet which Allah Almighty created it so that this light to be inside it. And it is an atomic one. No need for anything to make the fire always to be distinguishing. No need. All by itself. Allah Almighty only by looking at it. كأنها كوكب دري يوقد. It is always lighted. From Allah Almighty every second to second without time. There is no time. In the three eternal. The three eternal of the three eternal, no time. In every second to second, 70,000 looking, Allah Almighty looking at the crystal planet, where the light in it, the example of the light of Allah Almighty. يوقد من شجرة, and Allah Almighty describing that as if this planet, it is like this planet is not a crystal globe, a round one. Even for people, every kind of planet is a round. But this one is like an olive tree, and like the tree of Al-Qawl, what is the calm tree, which means the tree of majesty, of the divinely hidden treasure, from which is based inside and coming up in all the divine, the godly words, from the absolute identity to the essence, to the uniqueness, to the oneness, to the attributes, to the names, to the deeds. Like this it is free. But Allah Almighty saying it is also in a crystal condition globe. And Allah Almighty describing it like an olive tree. Olive, because Allah Almighty making the lights of the oil of the olive to be always lightened. How it is an example, so to make the mankind to know how the oil always lightening, like this tree always is lightening by itself, only by the eyes, looking the eyes of Allah Almighty. On it, it is lightening. And Allah Almighty filling all this globe by small, tiny, cannot be seen even by eyes. Cannot be seen by eyes. Tiny, if you split the atom, how much you split the atom? If split to neutron, lepton, and then split until it will not be seen, only you can see on the screen that these are moving. Cannot be seen by the eyes. Even if you bring another eyes which is just to see, you will reach, Allah making you to reach to a point that however even 124,000 prophets will put all their power of prophecy to see these tiny atoms which Allah filled this globe, cannot see it. And Allah Almighty making on this tree, which is the example of His light, the example of His light, the tree, a green bird. A green bird. Ordering him from tree eternal to every day to eat these from these tiny atoms. How much there is inside, no one can count, countless, endless, no border, no limit. If all prophets, all creations cannot count. And these small, tiny atoms, they are so small how in the rays of sun you see sometimes small dust, smaller. If you cut these dust and split them until no more to be able to be seen, even all the power of prophets cannot see, like this was full. A whole huge globe, galaxy, more than a galaxy, containing all galaxies, all thrones, all whatever is going to appear from the divinely attribute as a creator of Allah Almighty. And ordering this bird to eat. And this bird was eating, which means all these lights, they are the example of the light of Allah Almighty entering inside this bird. Until this bird finishing all these tiny atoms, not even split one, totally finishing them, then this bird no more bird appeared to be Shaykh Muhammad-ur-Rasul. It was the soul of Rasulullah, Allah making it to this bird. Then no more bird, finished. The bird finished and only coming Muhammad-ur-Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, dressing inside him all these descendings of the hidden treasure of Allah Almighty to the stage of the divine, the godly word of Allah Almighty. And Allah Almighty, then when you want to make with the flour to make a dough, how you will mix and dough until it will be well for rolling it, for to make some cakes or anything to cook. And like this, Allah Almighty was looking second to second, 70,000 times with the light of Allah Almighty, was Allah Almighty mixing and these lights until it was the example of the lights of Allah Almighty, and Allah Almighty explaining it in this holy ayat which we recited before. When this moment disappeared, as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the shape of Rasulullah no more bird, appearing Muhammadun Rasulullah, this bird disappeared. And then the first thing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah Almighty ordering this light, the example of his light, to talk with him. Ordering him to talk. And for this Mawlana say, if all awliya, if all prophets, if all grand sheikhs, if all Sahib al-Zaman, Sayyidina alayhi salam, even the knowledge of the secrets of the Holy Quran, if it is open, cannot even give one description of a tiny atom of the example of the life of Allah Almighty, which is the reality of Rasulullah. Between them, between the secrets of the Holy Quran and between the description of this light, example of the light of Allah Almighty, there is 10,000 oceans of lights from Allah Almighty. If any one of them will put one foot, he will be totally vanished. And no more Yawm al-Qiyamah will he appear again. In the first floor of the first step from the 10,000 oceans. And if any one of the awliya want to reflect from the reality of this light of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, less than this, then he will be blamed from Allah Almighty and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which they will scold him that you make the definition of Rasulullah is low. You are not authorized. You will be kicked away and they will take from him the light of Wilayah. Even a prophet, even awliya, even sultans of awliya, even the highest type of malaika over the throne, or to infinity, no one can give any description for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even a tiny atom of description for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Between them and his reality, 10,000 oceans of lights. The essence of Allah Almighty, the absolute identity of Allah Almighty, before he gives smell to what is going to appear from the atom, the reality of the beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah Almighty made the first to smell, the smell of Allah Almighty. Anyone can dare or wish to smell the smell of Allah Almighty. The smell of Allah Almighty, if not a tiny atom, even less, which cannot be seen, a smell will come, then all whatever descending from names, attributes, deeds will be vanished, and only the absolute identity of Allah Almighty will be if edited of smell. And so the first to be smelled, the smell from Allah Almighty, the smell of Allah Almighty was given to the reality of this reality of the example of the light of Allah Almighty, after was well mixed by the eyes and the lights of Allah Almighty, everything entering into him, and he was then appearing as the reality of the example of the light of Allah Almighty. Allah made him to smell, because Allah Almighty, He make him to appear this perfect reality, this perfect example, light of the lights of Allah Almighty was brought up from the attributes from the absolute identity of Allah Almighty, by which is swimming. Allah Almighty saying, وَكَانَ عَرْشُهُ عَلَى الْمَاءِ. My throne was on water. In the Holy Quran, Allah Almighty saying, not water which we know, but it is the attributes, the ocean of Ar-Rahman and the ocean of Ar-Rahim, the ocean of the merciful, Ar-Rahman, and the ocean of Ar-Rahim, the most merciful. From these two oceans, when they were touching in the absolute identity of Allah Almighty, of His attribute, these two attributes, when they were, these oceans, not oceans as a small ocean, but oceans cannot be a big ocean like Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, nothing in front of this ocean. When these two oceans meeting, this reality appeared. The fruit of these two oceans were meeting together as if married, both of them together. Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim come the reality of Rasulullah, the example of the light of Allah Almighty. And it was still only the fruit. The fruit of the mix of the two oceans when they was submerging together, meeting together, entering inside the one to the other, without this one touching the other, the fruits coming, this reality, this light, this tiny atom, this reality, the example of the light of Allah Almighty, and it was totally, perfectly only a sign, this reality of love of Allah from the ocean of love. The fruit of the two oceans of the Rahman and Rahim is coming, the fruit love, and love was Muhammad. Love of the absolute identity of Allah Almighty was the reality of the example of the lights of Allah Almighty, beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Allah Almighty decorated it and lightened it. First of all, blessed Allah Almighty from His absolute identity and essence by the lights of wilayah from Allah Almighty. And by the lights as a chosen from Allah Almighty, beloved to Allah Almighty, by these lights of wilayah as Allah chosen and beloved something, blessed by the lights of wilayah, which is suitable for it, which is suitable for this Muhammadi reality, for this reality of love, which Allah Almighty made the fruit of the meeting of these two oceans of Al-Rahman and Al-Rahim. The first was to be dressed by lights of wilayah, not light of prophecy, by light of wilayah, by light of chosen from Allah Almighty, which is suitable for it. And it was coming from the divine, the godly words of names, from the name of Al-Quddus of Allah Almighty. Blessing it by Quddus. What is the meaning of Quddus? Not purity. 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 Totally purity. 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 Pure. Totally purity. Quddus means pure. Pure. Purity from Allah Almighty. And then Allah Almighty blessing it by all means of the descendant of the almightiness of Allah Almighty, from absolute identity to essence, from essence to uniqueness, from uniqueness to oneness, from oneness to attributes, from attributes to names, from names to deeds, by purity, by the name of Quddus, by the name of purity of Allah Almighty. And blessing all these descending stages of Allah Almighty, descending, all these lights were addressed to this reality. And also in second to second, 70,000 times Allah looking at this reality. After completing this reality by purity and making it the source of love, of the combining, the meeting of the ocean of Al-Rahman and Al-Rahim, and dressing all these lights of wilayah. The second light was dressed after wilayah is the light of seal of Prophet. First seal of wilayah, then seal of Prophet. Seal of Prophet and the seal of Prophet as the first wilayah from the name of purity, Al-Quddus. the second, the light of prophecy, seal of prophet, was appearing from the name of Al-Wahid, of Ahadith, the uniqueness of Allah, of oneness of Allah Almighty. Then Allah Almighty, of oneness of Allah, of Wahdaniyah, He addressed the secret of the seal of prophecy. He started to address this reality, the example of his life, by the light of Rasul, as a messenger, as a representative, as a Khalif, represent Allah Almighty in all these divine godly work of Allah Almighty, and address it by the name of Allah, from the name of Allah, the name of Wahdan of Allah Almighty, which means the name which Allah is the name which is in it. Allah Almighty making the name Allah Almighty in it all, including the name Allah Almighty, including Jami' al-Asma'i wa Sifat, all divinely attributes and divinely names of Allah Almighty with the greatest name, all together with the sum of Allah Almighty of attributes and names and deeds, all together will be Allah. And from this name of Allah Almighty was the third light as a representative, as a Rasul for Allah Almighty, a messenger for Allah Almighty. And in it Allah Almighty endorsed in this light of Allah Almighty, who is blessed as a light of Rasul, as a Risala, as a messenger, as a representative of Allah Almighty, as a Khalif of Allah Almighty. He put in it, he include in it all the divine, the godly word of names and attributes of Allah Almighty. And after all this, Allah Almighty ordered him to talk. Allah talked to him. The first talk from Allah, the first words from Allah Almighty to this reality, to this example of the light of Allah Almighty. My beloved, who am I? Whom you are? My beloved, whom am I? After all this training, all this behaving, all this dressing, and all this endorsing on this globe, in this reality, which is the fruit of the Rahman and the Rahim, these two oceans, as love of Allah Almighty, and blessed by the light of wilayah from the Quddus, purity of Allah Almighty, then by the seal of Prophet from the name of oneness, Al-Wahid, the one, and then by the name and from the attributes of as the messenger, from to be blessed by the name of the lights of Allah Almighty, as from this name Allah, which contain all the attributes and names of Allah Almighty. Allah Almighty talk, beloved, oh beloved, whom am I, whom you are? Talking to this reality, in this book. And our Almighty sealed of Prophet, our Rasul, Al-A'zam sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Mu'azzam, whom Allah Almighty always great, dressing him by greatness from Allah Almighty, he replied by a tongue which was suitable for that high Makkam, for that high rank, suitable to talk with the absolute identity, which cannot be entered into words. How he was talking, no one can even realize, but it was translated to letters so that we will understand about it. And according to this highest rank by the divinely godly tongue of Allah Almighty was our beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam replying, answering to Allah Almighty. And it was the first words which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a reality, the first in the pre-eternal, the first to talk, to answer to Allah Almighty, talk with Allah Almighty, after smelling the smell from Allah Almighty. And translating it into words, and cannot enter into letters, but translated from the one who was with Rasulullah, this band whom they were with Allah, witnessing that there is a band of chosen ones, my beloved Muhammad, I am witnessing Allah saying, one the highest top of them, and for this Rasulullah say, I am the city of secrets and realities, and Siddiq is in all of it. He was translating to them. And for this knowledge of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq was from heart to heart, is not written, cannot be written, cannot be entering into heart. And the first Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, by the divinely godly tongue of Allah Almighty, answering to the absolute identity of Allah Almighty, أنت القهار وأنا عبدك العاجز. You are al-Qahhar. What is the Qahhar in English? I don't know in English. Which is everything. You are the one whom everything is under your, how you say, all these people, they are under my hand, my control. Not control, but in my hand, all in my hand, like this. You are the one whom everything in your hand, and you will finish it. Not, you cannot, you will don't appear it. If you like, and if you like, you will appear it. And I am your weakest servant. And I am your weakest servant. He didn't say, I am the example of your life, but he said, I am your weakest servant. To serve all who under your name of Qahhar. And then Allah Almighty, knowing, ask me, what is the meaning of Al-Qahhar? What is the meaning of this? Telling me you are the Qahhar, which everything is in your capture. You can appear it, or you can vanish it. Erase it, finish it. And also, what is the meaning, my beloved, of a servant? You are saying, and I am your weakest servant. What is the meaning of servant? My beloved, what is the meaning of servant? What is the meaning of servant? Which you answer me. Inshallah, tomorrow will continue, because now we are going to be 8 o'clock, we are late. This kind of knowledge take time.
So loud.
That is all written in Arabic. I make books. But but no one understands.
No one can translate it. No way.
Can translate. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll continue. Allah These 4 books are Sattar for you, which you tell my son, but keep this one here. No, I have. Take them. I do know. These are the manuscripts from time of grand Shaykh to each say now what is Saudi. And from it, all these knowledge comes. But even this one is even Arabic, but no one can read this Arabic or understand it. It's not ordinary Arabic. It is the Arabic of the ancient centuries, of the 1st century of Islam. It's coming from Sayyidina Now, inshallah, we move. وإلى الله التوفيق وصلاة النبي وآله وصحبه على الرجال والمسلمين الفاتح. You heard about such knowledge, Shaykh Hassan? This knowledge of Mawlana Shaykh Adnan. You heard? This only will be open in time to Sahib al-Zamana, Sayyidina Adnan. Not for this time. It is being told of the ones who do Thursday.
Inshallah, tomorrow, peace comes to celebrate Mawlid. Nabi celebrations at Maghrib time.
Maghrib time, inshallah, tomorrow Maghrib time we celebrate Mawlid-ur-Rasul by the adab and the Mawlid which used to be done from old young sheikhs to young sheikh, Mawlana Shaykh Adnan to us now. This year we'll celebrate it with all of you tomorrow by the adhan of Maghrib, inshallah. Be ready and I will be ready, inshallah. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.